Hi there, and welcome to another edition of Global Conversations. Again, this is Andre Darmanin. Today I'm going solo. My co-host Priya was not able to join us, but I'm doing a little bit of a different format here today. For the very first time, I'm not only not having a co-host, but I'm actually doing this on my own. And the thing is, the conversation is going to flow anyway, because our guest here, Angela Howard, her and I have known each other for, not even a year, but we get along in so many different ways. This conversation is just gonna flow. It's gonna fly by, and we're gonna have a great time together. So basically, what we're gonna be talking about is, the whole area of industrial organizational psychology. How does that play out in equity, diversity, inclusion, and what can people learn from that in terms of how do we build organizations? How do we build equity within our organizations? And looking at a different approach in terms of the work that Angela does. And I'm so happy to have Angela here. Angela, like I said at the outset, well, other than the fact we have a lot of similarities and with what we do and our personal lives and stuff like that, it's it's great to have this conversation. I'm so grateful to now have you as a reciprocal guest, because as I will show in the notes, Angela and I had a conversation on her podcast. I believe it was early December. So now it's going to be, for mine it was more about the urban planning side. Hers is going to be on the IO side, but we're all talking about equity in the same way. So Angela, it's great to have you today, and yeah, thanks for this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for this. So you know what? Let's just get the ball rolling here. Tell the audience about yourself, your career, lived experiences, passions, and yeah, let's start with that, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So hi everyone. My name is Angela Howard. I guess by trade, my academic background is in industrial organizational psychology. So my career, the schooling that I had has kind of prepared me to focus on behavior at work, essentially. And so that's where my career path has taken me. So what does that mean when it comes to the work that I do? How does that manifest itself, I guess? So I have a company called Call for Culture that really focuses on moving from intent to impact when it comes to culture change. So I think we're hearing a lot about buzzwords like DE&I, like equity, like wellness, and all these things really point to the system of work and how it operates traditionally and what people are asking for and what they need, which really gets to that conversation around equity. So I am more focused on systems level change versus surface level change. And my firm, Call for Culture, really focuses on some human elements that oftentimes get overlooked in the workplace. So we use concepts from psychology, sociology, neuroscience, and anthropology to really drive change within organizations.
Yeah. So, since I've known you, you've gone through a little bit of a transition, not only with the naming of your initial podcast, but also the naming of your company. So how did that all come about? And we all go through transition over our careers, over our lives. So this is something I'm curious about, like why the name change? What exactly happened? What transpired?
Yeah. So when I started this journey into entrepreneurship, it was actually just a year ago, which doesn't even make any sense to me, but it was only 12 months ago that I went out full time to build something better, to build my own firm. So my career before launching Call for Culture was as a chief people officer. I've led teams, there's lots of different names around culture change, but I've led teams in employee experience, talent management for about 15 years of my career, and decided that it was time to make a change. And I just had this entrepreneurial spirit that I couldn't quite shake. And I knew I had kind of a methodology and a formula for that. And so when I started, I really was focused on more so me being the service provider, right? So going into organizations, I had done this internally. I knew what the steps were. I knew how to do it. And so that was kind of the first step. So Angela was the brand. Angela was providing the services. And that's a very different mindset around establishing a methodology and an approach, and then being able to scale that approach and provide that to organizations. So as far as the name change goes, we went from Angela R. Howard Consulting to Call for Culture. So, I was trying to do the the meme where Homer is like backing up into the bushes. That's what I wanted to accomplish is I wanted to be less about me, more about the cause, more about the movement, and more about scaling this methodology. So that was the reason for the name change. And then as far as the podcast goes, I really wanted to shift to this conversation around ESG, sustainability in the workplace. I was quite honestly tired of talking about the future of work because we were already here. We've catapulted like decades over COVID. And so I was kind of tired of talking about like this future state and really wanted to talk more about, people, planet, profit, and what that means from a social responsibility perspective and how businesses need to start thinking and rethinking their platforms now, not in the future, now, and why that's important for the environment, for our people, for humanity. So that was a kind of a big shift around the premise of the podcast too.
And yeah, I mean, hearing this and hearing our conversation from last year, there are some similarities in the sense that, we constantly talk about the environment. We talk about, how do we change our neighborhoods? How do we change our culture so that it reflects the diversity of the people within the organizations, et cetera. But we constantly circle around these topics year after year, month after month, day after day. And it gets tiring after a while, especially when there's no change, right? So how do we go about making this change? This is something that, I'm curious to hear what you think about those revolving conversations and constant conversations.
Yeah. So, the first thing, if we're talking about the workplace, which is, I consider that one system of many that are interconnected. And I know we talked about that, but we're really talking about systematic and systemic changes. Systematic is really, kind of wide scale, massive change across a container or a system, right? Where we're saying, all right, we're going to make a decision and we're implementing that change. Systemic is really more so taking into consideration the context as to which that system has operated historically. And I think we ignore that a lot of the times, or to be frank, there's leaders within organizations who don't even believe it's a factor. And I think that is a huge barrier for us in this work. If we can't even acknowledge that things like racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, all of those things don't exist in the systems and aren't baked in to the point where they can be unconscious and just kind of operate and be recycled throughout systems, then we're in trouble, right? So, I'm from the US. I know you're from Canada, so we come from a different kind of cultural context with some of those things, but that's a huge barrier. So I think we need to acknowledge, and then if we know that there's systemic elements that have seeped into the systems that we operate in today, we have to really think about changing paradigms and deconstructing or unpacking some of these things to the point where we can identify where the inequities are happening, or where the lack of fairness is occurring in those systems. So I know that's a very short answer to a very complex issue, but those are just some things to think about.
No. And that's something that's important because, one of the things that really drives me in my work is, how my lived experiences and how the inequities exist within our systems, and how we, like I said earlier, how we continuously are revolving around the same issues over and over with no action happening here. So, going back for a second here in terms of your, your lived experience, of course, for the audience who's just listening instead of watching, both Angela and I are mixed ethnicity. So we have probably different lived experiences, not only living in the US, but also other types of experiences. But I'm pretty sure that our lived experiences and how we got to where we're at, explains the passion for what we do. So is there like a certain story that you can tell that that drove you to doing not only your degree, but also the work that you're doing and why you're passionate about it?
Yeah. So like you, I am of mixed race. So my father is Black. My mother is Eastern European. And if you're watching this and you're looking at me and maybe trying to identify where I come from, I am of lighter skin tone, right? I am what you might call passing, and that comes with a lot of privilege. So I think that exploration in the workplace and showing up just enough to say, when I walk into these rooms with leaders, I am the person who's different, but also understanding my privilege in a broader context, I think is a really important lived experience for me. It's quite confusing, to be honest. I know you and I are actively exploring these concepts as we're getting older, and we're also identifying like how we show up in the world. So that certainly had a big impact on me. Also, I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. So for those of you who might be from the Chicagoland area or know anything about it, there's a neighborhood called Rogers Park. If you Google it, I think it's one of the most diverse in the country, where I think there's 60 plus languages spoken. So I grew up in kind of a microcosm utopia of diversity. I was also of mixed race. And so imagine that little container for, my childhood, and then stepping into the school system or stepping into corporate America, and then stepping into getting my graduate degree. Slowly but surely, it wasn't probably until probably after my undergrad, because my undergrad, I went to Northeastern Illinois University, which is also highly diverse. It wasn't until after grad and I stepped into corporate America and into graduate school that I realized, I realized that I was of mixed race. I knew this, but that the representation was scarce, especially at the leadership levels. So that was certainly a lived experience. And then, finally stepping into rooms, because I worked in talent management. I worked in HR. I was in the rooms where decisions were being made about people's success, promotions, succession, hiring, firing. So stepping into those rooms and hearing things like they're not a culture fit, or they just aren't quite getting it, or, we really want to promote her, but she doesn't have executive presence. Like all of these really concepts that were based on, I would say, conformed ideas around people who didn't look like me or act like me or couldn't relate to things that I related to. So all of that to say, my schooling in academics and organizational psychology really brought to the surface that some of these things are baked into our systems. And so when you talk about culture fit, what does that mean? What are we talking about? And how is that creating disparity around success and ideals around success and professionalism and operating in the system? So all of those things together kind of culminated and meshed to my point, which is, let's talk about the human experience when it comes to culture. Let's not talk about these ideals, these concepts that are really rooted in really traditional and outdated views.
Yeah. And, I just sit here, nod my head, and I'm just like, and just saying exactly the same things I do, because, I too have talked about this whole, what does executive presence mean, and why, and where does it come from, and why did, how does this impact, how does it impact global majority people, Black, Indigenous people as well? And so, why are we continuously following that, those ideas, and, and also we talk about culture fit so much, right? You're basically put into a box because of your skills and experiences, but not your human experiences, right? They talk about how humanizing the workforce, or through policies and procedures, but how do they how do they um, how do they reflect in how you serve your customers, and et cetera, right? So those are things that kind of they come to mind, and that's exactly why you and I get along in this respect, because we have those same ideas and thoughts, and we need to start talking about the present, as you mentioned before. So and I think we might have touched on this a little bit, but I think we want to talk about the common misperceptions and challenges that drive culture change. I know we've talked about the culture fit and executive presence, but are there any things that you've come across in your career, or even your time as an entrepreneur, uh, that's that has been challenging for you, or what are those misconceptions, if you will?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that we romanticize culture. And what I mean by that is, I think we are all leaning on this version of culture as, all right, we're in the office and there's all this energy and the food trucks and the ping pong tables. And it's like this very surface level approach to culture, when in reality, culture is really just, how are you matching your experiences with your words?
Mhm.
It's, are we kind of clear on the behaviors or the norms of the
Mhm.
organization? How are we role modeling those things? So I think there's a big misconception around what, like, the ecosystem of culture and how it actually gets driven and changed. I think that the other misperception is that culture is top down. So you kind of get executives in a room, you develop some values, and you say, these are our new values, put them on a wall, we're living them. And then
Yeah.
everyone's like, but you've got Chad on the executive team who berates everybody and doesn't create psychologically safe spaces, although you have a value of inclusion. How does this make sense, right?
Yeah.
So there's kind of a I don't know, a buyer's remorse sometimes when people join organizations and they realize, like, beautiful words, but we're not living them.
Yeah.
And then the last one is role modeling. A lot of times organizations will say, all right, these are the values. You all make sure they happen. And the executive team is not looking internally to say, are we role modeling these things? Are we, like, because people are watching.
Yeah.
People are watching you as a leader. And so if you're not role modeling, nobody's going to feel the need or the incentive to do the same.
Yeah, and I agree with you in that we've been in these workplaces, we see them firsthand, and this is something that that we've learned throughout our careers, that we see that you're not putting pen to paper to or you're putting it to paper, but yet you're not reflecting the values. And now, even with all this conversation around the cultures then themselves, I mean, one of the things wrongly is the partisan view of the whole Silicon Valley Bank demise, right? They talked about culture, right? Culture was a problem there, and among other things, and now even too about people returning to work, all that kind of stuff. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of factors that are involved, and that's something that I've tried to wrap myself or wrap my head around that issue. So, you know, these are things that we need solutions for. And and you talked about at the outset, you talked about impact. And so how are we supposed to move from the intent of these organizations to having them impactful? And of course, you have an actual acronym for those, for impact itself. So kind of walk me through and walk the viewers through on your model, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, our model is based in a few different intersections when it comes to concepts. So impact is an acronym, and it starts with the invitation. We call it the invitation. And that is really about ensuring that you are engaging every level within the organization. And you cannot underestimate this part of the process. It takes time. A lot of times people want to jump in and say, culture change, we're doing it, transformation. There's this big, beautiful campaign, and they send a beautiful email and a video from the CEO, and it's great. we have to take the time up front to understand where people are coming from, the changes that have happened in the organizational context, the artifacts of the organization. All these things have to integrate together. The M is for messaging. So then we move into really kind of your inclusive messaging and communications plan. And we have a playbook that we've developed, and we essentially, everything is fit for purpose when we work with an organization, but we like to give you something to start with. So we've developed kind of a flow or a play-by-play as to how a communications plan can be rolled out over 6 months as we're kicking off this process. And then we work really intentionally to identify who are our, and I want to say stakeholders, but I know this is a problematic term. I just haven't found another word for it. Who are our key players in the organization that we really need to think about tweaking our messaging for. We spend a good amount of time doing that. We talk to people, we understand where they're coming from. We also work through the skepticism. This is also something that organizations don't do enough of. 100% of the time, there's going to be skepticism because maybe you did something like this before, you didn't take action, or people aren't excited about the leadership team actually making change. We have to work through those concerns and we have to lean into them and we have to face them. And then we move into P, which is what we call purpose alignment. So this is the part where we really spend time with the executive team because although this is a multi-layered process where we're engaging everybody, we have to talk to people who are setting the direction for the organization, understanding what is the purpose of the company. Let's get back to our roots. What are the values? Let's realign on the values. And are we talking about the same thing? So we actually, basically what we leave that 3-day meeting with is like a culture code or playbook that has a purpose statement that we've aligned on, our values, but also the behaviors around those values, what they look like and what they don't look like. And that's the secret sauce to this. And then we don't roll this out to the organization. We actually get input from the organization on that output. And then A is assessment. So we have to put a pin in where we actually are versus where we want to go. And we have a diagnostic, a survey, and interviews that we conduct. And that's really important. We need data. We need to be able to consolidate the state of the organization. And then lastly, we get our results and we move to kind of a road mapping exercise. We call it the blueprint, where we're presenting the results. We are working with you on some tactical action planning, which is the T, the last part of this. And our clients leave with a scorecard for implementation. So it's very clear, what are we agreeing to do? And we also work in tandem with that communications plan to make sure we're updating the organization around progress. So a lot of times what happens is we launch an engagement survey or culture survey or DE&I survey or any kind of diagnostic, and we get these results. People have shared their souls and their perspectives, and they've poured into this process, and nothing happens. There's no follow-up, or we're losing the narrative as to how is what I said and what I shared actually becoming a piece of feedback that people are practicing and implementing. And so we try to make that connection really clear. And then we work with them for 6 months. So we work as a coach behind the scenes because there is a sustainability element to this, which is we're consultants, but we're just guides. We're just facilitators. It's only sustainable when the organization can take this on in full and implement it within the organization. Yeah. And then we reassess. That's the last step to see if there's any movement.
Yeah, and that's the most important part here is understanding what's going on within the organization and then following up with them, because you want to have that connection with them, not only from a business perspective, but as well as from a personal connection to the organization, because that's the most important. I believe feedback and going for the feedback cycle is the best thing here in terms of building relationships with an organization that you're working with to help, to assist, and move forward. And of course, I'm sure you use a lot of equity and inclusion principles within the work that you do, and that's part of what drove you and whatnot. So I wanna actually go back to something you said about, you know, the stakeholders aspect, and I know it's becoming a little problematic. One thing I can say is, so I know we talked in our previous podcast, or your previous podcast, where we talked about you know, the Indigenous experience, right? And one of the things we've learned in our country is that you know, we call them rights holders because they own the land, right? And so that's something, maybe that's something you can bring together, bring to your perspective, because there are some people who, you know, within the organizations you work with, there could be a possibility of that, right? So, you know, whether it's with Indigenous people or even Black folks, right? Because some of their land was taken away during urban renewal and all that. I mean, I'm going back to urban planning here, but you know, that's the history of it. And I know we talked about it before. So yeah, so I mean, that's something that I've learned over my time, especially recently as I've been diving in my career. So maybe that's something that can help you out in terms of identifying the people that you're working with, and changing the language, the nomenclature, if you will. And you're already doing that as it is with the fact of, you know, moving from culture fit to culture add, or any of those types of terminology. So you know, and that's why people like yourself, people like Jenny Vasquez Newsom, who I had on a podcast before, we're going to have another conversation next week, actually. So, and it's just funny how the three of us all think the same way and all have the line. So, I mean, I don't want to spoil it for people, but we know how we have that relationship amongst the three of us. So I guess how I want to conclude this is a little something different, because it's more of a personal conversation between you and I that everyone is getting in, is listening to or watching. And so, you know, first of all, who are people within your career or within just even education or whatever, who are people that you have looked to, and why would they, like, what kind of influence do they have on you?
Yeah, I mean, I have had some amazing individuals who have seen things in me that I don't even see. You know, people who have brought out brilliance in me that I didn't even know was there until somebody pointed it out. The people who really have had an impact on me and influence on me have sponsored me. I think a lot of times we talk about mentorship way too much in this space, especially when it comes to historically underserved, underrepresented people. I don't want to be talked at. I want you to open doors for me. I want you to pay me what I'm worth. I want you to provide connections. I want you to distribute your power and your influence. Those are actions that people have, the most impactful people that have really shifted, like tectonic shifts in my career over time. Those are the types of actions that I've experienced.
And is there anyone in particular that has really influenced you in your career?
Yeah, I'll mention somebody. So Kim Sullivan, if she's listening to this, she has been first of all, a great human, a fantastic friend, but also a sponsor for me since early career. I met her while I worked at Walgreens, and she was one of the only Black women in leadership that I was able to reach out to and connect with. And she actually reached out to me initially because she identified something in me, but also realized that I was, you know, one of few within the group that we were in. And since then, we've been fantastic friends. She moved me to Seattle to take a leadership role at a company she was at. She has opened doors for me in many, many different ways. And she's a dear friend of mine and has made a huge impact on my life and career.
And that's, you know, and that's really important, that someone is there who follows you in your career. And, you know, as you said, sponsorship is something that's very important. We don't talk about enough, or if it is, it's just language, right? And so now it's a matter of how do we move from that mentorship to sponsorship, and organizations and leaders still haven't got that right yet. So I appreciate, you know, listening to that story and actually listening to your whole story. I mean, You know, I know a lot about you, you know a lot about me, but the audience doesn't know a lot about, who you are and what you bring to the table and all that. So at the end of the day, we're going to conclude our conversation, but just want people to know, how can they find you? How can they reach you? Give everyone the stats on how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, so pretty much on every platform except Twitter, we're on at Call for Culture. So Instagram, LinkedIn, our website is callforculture.com. And you can also find me individually at Angela R. Howard CFC on Instagram, or you could just search Angela R. Howard on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect with you.
Well, we have it here. This was a wonderful conversation, Angela, as always. And I always look forward to hearing your insights, seeing your inspirational Instagram posts, especially regarding your organization and the growth of your organization. And, in the little time that I've known you, I feel like I've known you a lot longer, given not only our lived experiences, but also our similarities in terms of how we approach things. And I thank you for not only inviting me to your podcast, last year, but also thank you for returning the favor and having people have the honor and the privilege to hear what you have to say. So thanks for this, Angela. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay, thanks. And that concludes another webcast of Global Conversations, and we'll see you soon.